Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. Elise Cannon. It's October 2nd, 2025. Today's Thursday, 727 days. We're in the middle of Rosh Hashanah, previously, and Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. These are the high holy days for our Jewish brothers and sisters, which I want to acknowledge. Just as we daily seek to acknowledge and give witness to the realities that are happening in the Middle East, and the atrocities that continue to be perpetuated in Gaza, death tolls have now surpassed a minimum of 66,000 people. Just yesterday, Israeli fire killed 36 Palestinians. 17 of them were killed while seeking humanitarian assistance. A few days before, on Saturday, Israeli strikes and gunfire killed at least 66 people across the Strip. So we're seeing a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen, dozens killed every day. The day before Friday, 74 Palestinians killed, 265 wounded. You probably have heard it said, Netanyahu talked about the invasion of Gaza City being a strategy to put further pressure on Hamas to demand that they would surrender. Saturday, it was announced by the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, that the IDF is increasing the intensity of its strikes. Things are not slowing down in Gaza. They're getting worse. 750,000 Palestinians have evacuated from the north. I've been talking about this in the past weeks. The conditions in the humanitarian zones in the south are so bad that people are leaving where there's an active ground invasion and intensive bombing in Gaza City, going to the humanitarian zones, and then returning back to the decimation that's happening because they feel like they will survive there better than in the conditions of lack of sanitation and lack of food and the morass of, a horde of people with no basic facilities at the humanitarian locations. The military wing of Hamas, the Qassam brigades, said that their fighters hit Israeli forces this week. I didn't see this in Haaretz and Israeli news, and I don't, always have time to scour things every day, but the Qassam brigade said that they had targeted Israeli vehicles and soldiers, killing and wounded them inside a school in Gaza City, Tal al-Hawa, this week. That was on Monday. Fighters opened fire at a close range, threw explosives into 2 armed personnel carriers, and detonated a bomb against a Merkava tank, causing casualties. The group claimed that on Sunday it blew up an Israeli Merkava tank with a powerful roadside bomb south of Gaza City's Sabra neighborhood. We often get our military reports from the IDF because they have the reports and the statements, but this was one of the statements that came out from Hamas. A senior Israeli political official told foreign media in New York on Friday that Israel does have information about the location of the hostages. Now, that probably means, of course, that rescue operations are taking place. We don't know more about that. What I wanted to talk significantly about is this now 20-point plan. You might recall when Trump first announced it, it was 21 points. It's now 20. But this 20-point plan that Netanyahu and Trump shared at the press conference on Monday, coming out of their meeting at the White House, Donald Trump and Netanyahu delivered an ultimatum to Hamas, essentially saying, we've come up with a peace agreement. Now you have to agree to it. They warned Hamas that unless this 20-point peace plan is accepted, Hamas will face the consequences. I want to tell you what the plan is a bit. The proposal requires Israel to release almost 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, including many life sentences. The plan calls for the disarmament of Hamas, and it bans it from any future political role in Gaza, which would be run by a technocratic transitional authority. And guess who would head it? President Trump himself. It requires the militant, this is a direct quote, so it requires Hamas to release the 48 hostages it holds, of whom fewer than half are believed to be alive, within 72 hours of the ceasefire coming into effect. But it offers gradual withdrawal of Israeli military forces to a buffer zone along the perimeter, with a surge of humanitarian aid, which is so desperately needed by the 2.3 million inhabitants in Gaza. Now, what's Tony Blair's role? He was one of the orchestrators of this plan with Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. I have more clarity on that. So Donald Trump would be the chair of the board, and Tony Blair, the former UK prime minister, would join the international body that oversees Gaza. So America essentially would occupy Gaza, and the global world would put together a board to govern it. I mean, that's language that's being used by a lot of analysts. Sir Tony Blair became the first named member of what's called the Board of Peace. He would be tasked with temporarily supervising the government if Hamas accepts the plan. Leaders from other countries on the highest of levels would be on the board, named later, Trump said. The board is a part of this 20-point plan, that would seek to end these 2 years of conflict and ethnic cleansing. The goal also would be a process of demilitarizing and redeveloping Gaza. Tony Blair said the plans were the best chance of ending the war, misery, and suffering. Now, news has said that the plans that were created by Tony Blair reveal high-powered positions. They would not only be filled by diplomats, they also would be filled by businessmen, and the top position in Gaza for that international transitional authority would be set up and orchestrated by Blair. What's the world's response been? Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, they backed the plan. A lot of Palestinians are saying, how could the Arab states sell us out? The idea is that these Arab states could put pressure on Hamas. Qatari officials said that they'd be meeting with Hamas to discuss the plan. Trump's peace proposal in large part was welcomed by world leaders, but Palestinians are quite skeptical, if not outright critical. The Palestinian Authority, which governs parts of the occupied West Bank, it could eventually take some kind of a role in post-war Gaza. They welcomed Trump's, quote, sincere and determined efforts, end quote. Now, Fatah, the political party that is behind, the members of the Palestinian Authority, they welcomed the U.S. efforts, but one of their senior officials said this plan is nothing less than a document of surrender. The Palestinian political movement said that they welcome these efforts. They want to protect innocent lives. They said they want to cooperate with all proper parties to have a ceasefire. They want humanitarian assistance. They want the release of captives, meaning hostages and Palestinian prisoners. They want to establish an international mechanism to safeguard Palestinians. They also are calling for the release of the frozen Palestinian tax funds. They are calling for complete Israeli withdrawal, which is a huge question, by the way. I'll talk in a minute about what Netanyahu said about all this. And they want steps to restore unity across Gaza. There have been unity agreements in the past between Hamas and Fatah. They have not lasted long. They want East Jerusalem and the occupied West Bank to be a part of a two-state solution. They also talked about implementing reforms and other things. Now, Abbas condemned Israel's actions in Gaza as genocide this week as well. And he said that the authority is willing to take responsibility for governing Gaza, as I just mentioned. But Palestinian factions that are aligned with Hamas had appeared to reject this plan. Now, that was initially Hamas, as of late last night, had not given their formal response. Egypt has said they're fully committed to implementing President Trump's vision of war. I talked about how they're already training Palestinian Authority police forces. They talked about their commitment at the UN General Assembly. They categorically reject forcibly displacing Palestinians and what is a crime of ethnic cleansing. Egypt is not and will not be a gate to liquidate the Palestinian cause. We will never, never be a partner in a new Nakba. Over the weekend, news reported that Hamas had agreed in principle to Trump's plan in Gaza. So you hear very different things depending on the day and which representative is speaking. But they later told representatives of the Palestinian factions that the full details of Trump's plan, they hadn't even received it at that time. So when Netanyahu and Trump did that press conference, Hamas hadn't even seen the plan. Now, there was an op-ed I would highly call your attention to, and I'm just going to read a few parts of it. It's by Josh Paul, the first official of the Biden administration who resigned over Gaza and Palestine. He's a human rights activist. He discusses this Kushner plan and says that it's complete with the same old visions of economic prosperity disconnected from realities on the ground or the rights of the people. It will not work and it should not be trusted. He ends the op-ed with these biting words. The world does not have to play along with the sugar-coated neo-colonialism. The Egyptian-led Arab plan for Gaza lays out an alternative. So there's this Egyptian plan that's an alternative to the Trump plan. The Egyptian plan would have a technocratic Palestinian interim government leading to the restoration of a democratically elected Palestinian government, the reconstruction of Gaza that's designed, led, and implemented by the Palestinian people. Josh Paul says such an approach might not maximize Gaza's investment profitability, and it would deny Blair his restoration from consultant to ruler. But history, indeed very recent history, shows the Kushner-Blair proposal is not only a moral atrocity, but a policy one too. Thousands of Palestinians remain under the rubble in Gaza, and yet thousands more yearn to rebuild it. You cannot build a Riviera on the bones of the dead, and you cannot build an occupation on the aspirations of the living. God have mercy. Tuesday, President Trump said he would give Hamas 3 or 4 days to respond, or else. The or else has not been specified, but Trump has been clear he would give everything over to Netanyahu for Netanyahu to do what he wants, which of course would mean more obliteration. Netanyahu did agree to this plan. The conversation is that they're very close to it coming to fruition. Again, as of last night, that was not yet the case. Many people, in terms of news articles I read, talked about how President Trump shot himself in the foot. This plan is announced on Monday. He and Netanyahu do a press conference. Netanyahu, in the press conference where the plan was announced, contradicted the content in the press conference. He said there will never be a Palestinian state. Absolutely not. He said the conditions may finally, the document says the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. That's talking about 2 states. And Netanyahu said absolutely not in front of Trump while they were announcing this plan, which many people are saying made Trump look, well, I won't end that sentence. A senior Hamas figure told BBC News that Hamas is likely to reject the Trump plan because it only serves Israel's interest and ignores those of the Palestinian people. Hamas is unlikely to disarm and to hand over weapons. That's a key condition of the White House proposal. Hamas has not yet given an official response. I did want to let you know, we heard a lot about the Allenby Bridge closing in terms of the West Bank, the King Hussein Bridge. It was opened for passenger traffic. I just talked to someone who's one of the key leaders in the Palestinian Christian community who came across the bridge. He said it was brutal. I think he traveled on Sunday. He said he's never seen lines like that. The big fear is that the closing of the border between Jordan and the West Bank will be used as collective punishment for Palestinians. In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces raided a town near Bethlehem and killed a resident. There continue to be military raids. I just talked to Rafat Kassis of Kairos Palestine and Reverend Dr. Munther Itzhak this morning, and they said that Israeli soldiers are in the Palestinian cities, and it's not even the exception to the rule. He said it's as if Oslo, not that it's been effectively implemented, but it's as if Oslo didn't even happen. The Palestinian Prisoners Society said Israel is escalating its targeting of Palestinians released earlier this year under previous Gaza ceasefire agreements. We've seen this happen before. At least 40 people who were freed in January and February exchanges were rearrested. 16 of them are in custody. We're not surprised by this. Often, if 1,500 people are released in a prisoner exchange, 1,500 other Palestinians are arrested. That's often kind of a part of the equation that we see happening in the occupied territory. Israel's foreign minister said that their clear national interest is to end the war and achieve its goals. Now, it's unclear what those goals are. Over the last 2 years, from the very beginning, Netanyahu and others said Hamas has to be defeated. A year ago, the former head of the Israeli military agreed with us and others who said Hamas is an ideology, it will never be defeated. So what are Israel's goals? That's not clear. The foreign minister said it is in national interest for Israel to end the war and achieve its goals. There continue to be protests in Israel. There were quite significant protests on Saturday. That's the most significant day. One of the things that's happening is Israeli human rights activists and others are getting permits to protest and still being arrested anyway. We're seeing that quite a bit in Israeli news. The National Security Minister Ben-Gvir said that Netanyahu has no mandate to end the war without a decisive defeat of Hamas. That goes to what I'm speaking of. If that's a war game, this war may never end. The United Torah Judaism, I'm assuming that's a political party. I'm not an expert on Israeli political establishments by any means, but their leader, Moshe Gafni, voiced support for ending the war. So we're seeing in Israeli society many voices like that. There also was movement on Qatar and Israel after the Doha attack. There was a three-way call between Trump and Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani. Netanyahu yesterday apologized for Israel. This wasn't yesterday, it was sometime this week, but Netanyahu actually apologized to Qatar for violating their airspace sovereignty in that recent strike that was targeting Hamas officials. The Israeli apology was a condition for Qatar to return to the negotiating table. In an interview with Al Jazeera, the Prime Minister of Qatar said Netanyahu's apology was not a favor to us. This was a basic right. So Qatar is resuming the mediator role. They confirmed that Hamas is studying this 20-point plan. Shifting gears to Syria, Israel reintroduced a demand for the humanitarian corridor in Syria's southern province of Suwaida. That's where there's been all that unrest with the Druze and other groups. So Israel is demanding that the humanitarian corridor in Suwaida in the south of Syria be established. And there have been these security talks and a potential agreement between Israel and Syria. A Syrian source said the demand has derailed that conversation. In previous talks in Paris, Syria has rejected that request, seeing it as a breach of its sovereignty. CMEP also did a webinar on Syria this week. You can see that on our YouTube channel. Some of it had to be edited because of security concerns, but I'd encourage you to take a look at that. In Lebanon, it has been 1 year since the assassination of the former leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, in Beirut. The current chief, Naim Qassem, spoke at an event acknowledging that 1 year anniversary, saying his departure was painful, but his presence remains alive and radiant. The achievements of the resistance movement are based on steadfastness and continuity, talking about how Nasrallah laid the foundations for modern resistance. Most Western states view Hezbollah and Nasrallah in particular as terrorists. The Yemen situation with the Houthis on Friday, it was announced that Israel struck the capital, Sana'a, and hit residential buildings. 8 people were killed. Monday, there was a missile attack from the Houthis that hit a Dutch cargo ship. The Houthis claimed responsibility for that attack in the Gulf of Aden. Yemen's Humanitarian Operations Coordinator Center announced yesterday that it's actually sanctioning. So the Houthis are sanctioning U.S. oil firms and executives and vessels. There's been continued conversations about Iran and reinstating the arms embargo and other sanctions on Iran based on its nuclear program. This is activating that snapback mechanism. We've been talking about this. The Trump administration deported 100 Iranians back to Iran on a U.S. chartered flight from Louisiana. And Iran's intelligence service attempted to recruit, quote, hundreds of Israeli citizens, end quote, via phone calls on Saturday. So said the Israeli police. When people picked up the phone, they were offered to be recruited to an Iranian organization. I have numerous updates on international advocacy. The vast majority of officials and diplomats that were gathered at the UN General Assembly walked out last Friday when Netanyahu took the stage for his address. He said that he plans on finishing the job related to Gaza. And in meetings on the sideline of the UN General Assembly last week, the UAE, United Arab Emirates, said that they were pressing Netanyahu to accept Trump's peace plan and to abandon any plans to annex the West Bank. Now, I just heard this morning that there were 2 small villages outside of Bethlehem that were just annexed into Jerusalem. So a formal annexation doesn't mean annexation is not already happening on the ground. Israel has formally paused annexation based on this crisis with the UAE. The UAE said the West Bank annexation issue has been dropped following a meeting they had with Netanyahu and their foreign minister. At the UN, there was a resolution that passed 2334 in 2016 that called for the immediate ceasing of all settlement activity in the OPT. A report reviewed the period just of this year, June 18th to September 19th, and outlined how Israeli authorities have destroyed areas and structures and how settlements have been growing rapidly. Late last week, there was a demonstration against Israel's military action in Gaza that drew more than 100,000 people. Some reports said 50,000, other reports said 100. It was the largest protests in Berlin, shut down the city. So that was happening in Europe. I want to give you an update about the Samud flotilla that Greta Thunberg and other activists are on. They have been detained. So this is the Swedish climate activist. The global Samud flotilla is taking a symbolic amount of aid into Gaza. They are attempting to break the 18-year blockade. So as of around 8:20 a.m. local time today, 8:20 a.m. local time Thursday, today, 28 boats were still sailing as a part of the flotilla. There were about 46 nautical miles from Gaza. 16 boats were intercepted by the Israeli military. The flotilla has said that they were illegal attacks. They were not, and Israel has said that the attacks were because the flotilla is not interested in aid, but instead a provocation. The first ships were intercepted, boarded by Israeli forces Wednesday night, local time, 70 nautical miles outside of Gaza. The flotilla accused Israel of aggressively targeting its vessels. The flotilla said in a telegram that they were deliberately rammed, targeted with water cannons. One of the vessels was hit with water cannons. No one on board was harmed. The Israeli Foreign Ministry said the vessels had been safely stopped and transferred to an Israeli port. Greta was on one of those ships, and the Ministry of Israel said that she and her friends are safe and healthy. The flotilla had 500 participants at this time, seeking to break the blockade. Late last week, Italy and Spain announced that they would send vessels to accompany the flotilla. I saw that Italy didn't want to cross into, waters where the Israeli military was because they didn't want a diplomatic incident. Greece guaranteed the safe passage. I'm not familiar right now if any European nations, Spain, Italy, and Greece were the three, if they're continuing to monitor the flotilla. We do know that the flotilla was also attacked on Wednesday. Two other pieces of big news in terms of sanctions and boycotting. Reebok has demanded the removal of their logo from Israel's national football team. This is a huge deal. And Microsoft, another huge deal, announced they are disabling services to the Israeli Defense Ministry because Microsoft's cloud storage was holding expansive surveillance data on Palestinians. So many activists would say this is because of the pressure of groups calling for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. The situation with Microsoft, sometimes it's calling corporations to literally apply U.S. or international law. In the U.S., Mike Huckabee, our ambassador to Israel, visited Egypt. It was said because the U.S. ambassador there would not be pro-Israel enough in conversations with Egypt. There's been a lot going on. Egypt has had forces that have been building up in Cairo. Israel's very upset. Not in Cairo, sorry. Egypt has forces that have been building up in Sinai. Israel is very upset about that. So Mike Huckabee was sent to Egypt to address the Cairo-Jerusalem tensions. Trump did say last week, I believe, that he would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. And so there's really a question of, he says one thing, other things are happening. What is said versus what is done often is quite contradictory. There was a federal judge who ruled this week the Trump administration used the threat of deportation to systematically silence academics and students who were protesting in support of Palestine. And the federal judge ruled this is a violation of the First Amendment. When asked whether non-citizens lawfully present here in the U.S. actually have the same free speech rights as the rest of us, the court answers this constitutional question unequivocally. Yes, they do. The son of the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, attempted to recruit billions of dollars. I was talking about this today and I said hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of funding from Qatar. So Steve Witkoff's son, I won't go into that any further. Cori Bush, who formerly was a member of Congress, is preparing to run again. She was an ardent advocate on Palestine. His Beatitude Theophilus III, talking about Christians in the region, met with President Erdogan of Turkey to reaffirm the status quo of Jerusalem's sacred heritage. The Greek Orthodox had their bank accounts put on hold because of the Arnona tax issue. That's something that CMEP is working on significantly. And separately, Catholic leadership had a meeting with the Catholic ordinaries of the Holy Lands on the Arnona tax issue. I wanted to call your attention to a Prayers for Peace blog that we published this week that's called Occupation Does Not Harm the Palestinian. Occupation, not the Palestinian Authority, harms Christians in Palestine. This was written by a Jerusalem Voice for Justice, which is an ecumenical witness for equality and just peace. Signers of this statement include the former Latin patriarch, Michel Sabat, and numerous others you would recognize. Responding to the claim about Christians in the Holy Land, the Jerusalem Voice for Justice group responded and said, the reason Christians and so many others are leaving is the Israeli occupation and its policies of closures, permits, exclusionary resident rights, etc. This is not the policy of the Palestinian Authority. We insist Christians and Muslims in Bethlehem and throughout Palestine continue to live together as one people, sharing the same struggles under occupation. The truth remains, Palestinians, Christians, Muslims alike seek equality, justice, and peace in their homeland. I encourage you to read that Prayers for Peace blog, and I'll close with the words of Oscar Romero. I've been reflecting on them a lot lately. In the midst of violence, he preaches the Beatitudes of Christ. There are people who opt for guerrilla war, for revolution. The church's option is for the Beatitudes. Christ was sowing a moral revolution in which we human beings can come to change ourselves from worldly thinking. And he said, we've never preached violence except the violence of love, which left Christ nailed to the cross. The violence that we must each do to ourselves to overcome our selfishness and such cruel inequalities among us. The violence we preach is not the violence of the sword, nor the violence of hatred. It is the violence of love, of brotherhood, sisterhood, the violence that wills to beat weapons into sickles for work. Those are the words of Oscar Romero. Might we employ the violence of love and preach the peace of Christ and ask that it might come quickly. Amen.